curiosity has a way of pulling us toward the hard edges of the past, toward places where comfort was thin and law was distant. Survival depended less on rules written in books than on what a family could build, defend, and endure with its own hands. When we picture the 18th century frontier, we imagine endless grass, a lonely cabin, smoke on the horizon, and a rider scanning distance. But we rarely stop to ask how ranching families, settlers, stockmen, and frontier households actually protected what mattered most to them. They guarded their land, their animals, their food, and the people sleeping under their roof in a world of constant uncertainty. Protection was not one dramatic act, but a system, a habit, a daily discipline, and sometimes a burden carried every day. It shaped how homes were built, how fields were planted, how children were raised, and how strangers were judged coming up the road. To understand how ranchers protected land and family, we first have to step into the truth of that 18th century world. This was not the age of instant communication, patrol cars, emergency calls, or floodlights washing over a property at night. In many frontier regions there was no nearby authority at all, and even where official power existed, help could be slow. In British colonies, Spanish borderlands, French outposts, and scattered settlements pushing into wild country, protection was rarely guaranteed by the state. Help could be uneven or absent, which meant one very important thing: if danger came, the first defense was the family itself. Danger might arrive as raiders, rustlers, wild animals, bandits, hunger, or fire, each threat demanding speed, nerve, and readiness from everyone. And that is where the real story begins, not with grand battles, but with design. Because protection started before any threat appeared. It started with where a ranching family chose to live. Because on the frontier, location could decide whether warning came early or late. Frontier people understood terrain in a way modern life rarely requires, reading every hill, tree line, riverbank, an open stretch for danger. They asked not only where grass was good or water was near, but what could be seen from that hill. They studied what could approach unseen through trees, where a rider might appear at dawn, and where floodwater might suddenly rise. They considered where livestock could be hidden or driven quickly, because a good sight offered more than opportunity. It offered warning, and warning could mean the difference between saving a herd, saving the family, and losing everything in a single terrible moment. Many homesteads and ranching outposts were placed with visibility in mind, because even a slight rise in land gave precious extra moments. From that rise, a family could spot movement sooner, judge direction faster, and decide whether to gather children, animals, weapons, or supplies. A cabin near timber offered building material and shelter from weather, but too much cover could also hide intruders. Closing an open ground created exposure, yet it also created sightlines, and frontier families constantly balanced concealment, visibility, access to water, and pasture. They wanted water nearby, but not so close that a river crossing became a danger or an easy path inward. They wanted pasture, but not spread so far that animals vanished beyond control or could be taken before anyone noticed. The land was never just scenery to them. It was part of the defense plan, studied as carefully as walls. Then came the house itself, and here again survival shaped architecture, because every beam, wall, window, and doorway had defensive meaning. Frontier ranch houses were plain and practical, built from regional materials: timber in forested country, adobe in Spanish lands, stone where quarried. Log walls were not romantic symbols to the people who raised them, but barriers whose thickness, height, and placement truly mattered. Smaller windows were easier to defend and less likely to weaken the structure, especially when danger could arrive without warning. After dark, a stout door with a heavy bar could hold longer than any decorative entrance, buying vital moments in fear and confusion. Many families kept the most secure side of the house, facing the direction from which danger was thought most likely. In exposed regions, buildings stood close together, forming a tighter domestic core with sheds, stores, pens, and work areas as buffers. In Spanish ranching country, especially northern New Spain, protection could become even more deliberate, and some outposts resembled miniature fortifications: thick adobe walls, inner courtyards, gates that could be shut, and livestock brought close at night. All reflected practical adaptation. This was not paranoia, but survival logic. The farther one lived from government, the more daily life carried security's weight. And the same logic appeared across frontier cultures. whether families spoke English, Spanish, French, or mixed languages in uneasy shared landscapes. But a house alone was never enough, because for a ranching family, true wealth was mobile, alive, and constantly vulnerable to lost cattle, horses, sheep, hogs, mules, and the tools needed to keep them alive were the real foundation of survival. Losing a building was catastrophic, but losing breeding animals, work animals, or stored feed could destroy the future as well. That meant ranchers had to think beyond walls, because they were defending space, movement, and the repeating routines of daily work. Corrals were among the simplest and most important instruments of security, turning open vulnerability into controlled space through strong enclosed design. Well-built corral protected livestock from wandering predators and thieves who always preferred the easiest and least risky opportunity. At night, animals were often enclosed, not for convenience alone, but because darkness made theft easier. Across wide open land and open ground, hoofbeats could disappear into distance before dawn, leaving only loss, silence, and too little time to recover. Horses received especially close attention, because a horse was transportation, labor, status, and escape all gathered into one animal. In many frontier regions, to steal a man's horse was not simple theft, but the crippling removal of his mobility. So horses were tethered carefully, stabled close, or kept within hearing range, never treated as distant animals of minor concern. A family might know the sounds of its own animals, the way a mother knows the breathing of a child, and that knowledge mattered, because strange movement in darkness, nervous animals, or barking dogs were warnings before danger showed itself. In that world before alarms and sensors, the entire homestead had ears, listening through wood, wind, animals, and instinct. Dogs played a larger role than many modern retellings admit, because on the frontier they were practical security, not sentiment alone. A dog was not merely a companion, but an early warning system, a hunting partner, and sometimes a household defender. The barking of dogs could alert a family long before eyes saw anything, and in that delay lay precious time, enough time to wake the house, move children, reach a weapon, and decide whether the figure outside was friend or danger. Weapons were essential, but not in the simple heroic way movies often show, because frontier tools had many uses. A ranching family hunted with them, butchered with them, worked with them, and if pressed, defended life with them. Muskets and rifles in the 18th century were powerful, yet slow by modern standards, demanding time, care, and reliable handling. They could misfire, powder had to stay dry, shot had to be ready, and accuracy depended on comm training. So responsible protection did not mean waving a gun from a porch, but maintaining it well and storing supplies within reach. It also meant teaching older children, especially sons but sometimes daughters too, to handle defense tools with discipline instead of panic. That point matters because on the frontier, protection was often a family skill, not simply a separate male responsibility. Men might patrol fences, ride boundaries, or answer threats at distance, but women were never merely passive figures indoors. Frontier wives and mothers managed homes that were strategic centers, knowing supplies, hiding places, doors, and emergency rhythms intimately. They knew how to load or pass weapons, ration food under strain, and preserve order when fear threatened collapse. Many women also worked outdoors, tended animals, kept gardens, and knew the land's rhythms as intimately as any man. If trouble came while men were away driving stock or trading, the household still had to function, and sometimes fight. Children too entered this defensive world early, not from cruelty, but because necessity made childhood shorter and responsibility heavier. Boys learned to ride, track, watch animals, and carry messages, while girls learned labor that kept households resilient. Food, medicine, storage, and fire care all mattered, and in many families the lines blurred according to need. Children were taught not only how to work, but how to notice broken fences, strange smoke, missing animals, and wrong silence. Even fear itself had to be educated, because fear without training becomes chaos, while fear shaped into habit becomes caution. One unglamorous but vital method of protecting land was simply marking and maintaining it through visible boundaries and constant repair. Fences were not just boundaries, but statements. This ground is seen, this property is watched, and this family is present. In wooded areas, fences might be split rails, while elsewhere brush, stone, ditches, or thorn barriers served the same purpose. Even when ranches were not fully enclosed, Defined space mattered enormously because it controlled animals, reduced disputes, and signaled claim, but fences demanded vigilance, because a broken line could mean wandering stock, theft disguised as accident, or deliberate testing. So ranchers walked their lines, rode their lines, and repaired them over and over. Through every changing season, his seasoned defense was often repetitive and nearly boring, until the day boredom failed and danger rushed through the neglected opening. That same logic extended to neighbors, because no frontier family survived long by pretending complete self-sufficiency was enough. Isolation was real, but so was interdependence, and several communicating households could become something like a local defense network. People relied on signals, mounted messengers, church bells, warning shots, and prearranged plans when strangers or stolen animals appeared. A rancher with good relations nearby was not merely sociable, but more secure when extra hands were suddenly needed. Still, cooperation did not erase conflict, because 18th century frontier life was crowded with contested land, theft, violence, and unstable claims. Empires claimed territory imperfectly, settlers advanced into lands already inhabited, and trade routes brought opportunity together with danger. Livestock could be stolen or disputed, and threats came not only across cultures, but from settlers, criminals, unrest, and desperation. In that environment, reputation became another defense, because an alert, armed, united family was a less tempting target. This is why vigilance ran so deep. Men rode the perimeter not only to inspect, but to show unmistakable presence. Strangers were questioned, tracks were read, routes were watched, and the movements of animals were committed to memory. People close to danger developed a powerful relationship with patterns, noticing when a herd moved too nervously or birds rose wrong. Much of protection was not brute force at all, but the practiced reading of signs before violence fully arrived. Night brought its own discipline, because darkness was not empty at all, but active, uncertain, and full of possible movement. Stock were brought closer, tools secured, embers banked carefully, doors barred, and someone usually slept lighter than the rest. In tense times, families clustered more tightly, weapons stayed close to hand, and animals were positioned for quick checking. Firelight inside the house could comfort, but it could also expose silhouettes through cracks and windows to watching eyes. So even the management of light mattered, because frontier security included knowing when to glow warmly and when to disappear in fire. More than armed threat terrified ranching families, because their whole world was built from things that burned quickly and completely. Wood, hay, grain, cloth, fences, roofs, wagons, and dry summer fields could all carry one spark into ruin across months of labor. One careless ember in the wrong season could destroy years of work. So protection meant preventing fire before panic ever began. Families stored combustibles carefully, controlled cooking fires, cleared space around buildings, and kept water close enough to reach without delay. The hearth was comfort, but it was also risk, and a household that survived attack could still be ruined by flame. Food security formed another invisible wall, because hunger weakens defense faster than fear and can break a household from within. Dried meat, corn, beans, flour, salt, seed, lard, and preserved vegetables were not supplies alone, but insurance against disruption itself. If raiders passed, whether cut travel or men tracked stolen animals for days, the families still needed dependable food at home. Smokehouses, granaries, and hidden caches became critical defenses, because not every attack struck bodies before it struck supplies first. Sometimes survival was threatened not by bullets or blades, but by the theft or destruction of what winter demanded most. In contested regions, militias added another layer, and many frontiermen, including ranchers, were expected to serve in local defense. Militia, service-trained men for group response, gave settlements some organized strength, and linked private protection to wider regional defense. But such systems varied widely and often failed, which is why private preparedness never disappeared from ranching life entirely. There a rancher might serve the militia, then sleep with his rifle near, mend his fence, count horses, and guard children. Ordinary life and defensive life almost merged, because the frontier rarely allowed a clean line between labor and protection duties. The same ride that checked grazing conditions also searched for intruders, reading land, movement, and silence with equal seriousness daily. The same sun-watering animals also learned whether hoofprints near the creek belonged there or signaled strangers moving close. Nearby, the same wife preparing winter stores was also building resilience against siege, sudden flight, hunger, loss, and prolonged uncertainty. Future Avon hospitality carried a defensive edge, because travelers could be welcomed, fed, and sheltered while their manners and questions were carefully observed. Frontier manners were not just kindness, but judgment. Who is he? Where from? What does he notice? What does he want? Does he study the yard, ask too much, or look at the horses longer than a harmless stranger would ever? A polite frontier conversation could quietly become security assessment, disguised beneath courtesy, while every answer, glance, and pause was weighed. Yet most days were not theatrical battle, but exhausting work. Tack repairs, watering stock, salting meat, tending gardens, and starting again. They patched clothes, cleaned tools, birthed calves, buried losses, taught children, and kept living through labor that never truly ended. The genius of their protection lay in the ordinary, because households were defended by habits long before danger arrived. Ever-sturdy building, controlled routines, shared labor, food reserves, armed readiness, local alliances, and strong animals made the household harder to break. Beneath every frontier myth lies a deeper truth. Families protected land because land meant continuity, belonging, and the right to remain. Land meant feeding children, passing something onward, and claiming that a hard place belonged to those who suffered and worked for it. They buried their dead within sight of it, watched over it through heat and storm, and tied family tightly to ground. To lose the pasture endangered the household, and to lose the household emptied the land of meaning entirely for everyone. So the answer is larger than guns and fences, because protection was built into every layer of frontier life itself. It lived in location, architecture, animals, tools, neighbors, routine, memory, and the reputation each family carefully maintained over time. Daily they learned to see early, store wisely, sleep lightly, and act together when danger arrived as suddenly as weather could. They defended, not only with force, but with foresight. And in that distant world, foresight was often the strongest weapon. Curiosity expects action from the old frontier, yet what it really reveals is discipline rather than the glamour of legend's survival. Belonged to people who prepared before dawn, repaired before failure, watched before panic, and stood together when horizons darkened. That is how ranchers protected land, how they protected family, and why their world continues to fascinate us now. Still beneath dust and silence, we still recognize the ancient instinct to draw a line around home and defend it fiercely. To say, whatever comes, this far and no farther, was the oldest promise a frontier family could make. There together,